Good morning, everyone. Without further ado, we will move straight on to our conversation with Anupama Raju, the poet. Anupama, uh, the first thing that came to my mind when I read your poems, and I've been fortunate to read two collections, is the transition that has come into your writing. From the poems of innocence, as it were, in your Mailapur poems, the Fatima Mata School. From there, there's a growing gravitas in your theme. Even a sort of a cynicism that has come in, a social awareness. Can you just comment on this change that has come about in your voice and your tone?
Thank you, and good morning, and thank you for being here this early in the day. Poetry needs listeners, so thank you. In terms of the evolution or change in tone between my first collection and this one, the latest one, I think it's mostly due to the fact that I am older. I think with age, a certain cynicism, a certain sense of helplessness, a certain sense of anger have all set in. Anger at the way the system is, anger at the way this country is run, anger at the things that we cannot control. And I do have a couple of poems in this collection where I do express my rage at everything that's happening, and all that we can do is write poetry, but it is never enough.
True. Particularly when you speak of your anger, I was reminded of the poem that you have written about turning 73. There's a political tone in that, distinct political tone. You say, "Bring me the republic that we should have." I think those were the lines. There's a very distinct political tone in that. Can you just comment on that?
I wrote that poem when we were celebrating our 73rd Republic Day. And I also wanted to do it in a way that would not be too obvious. I also wanted to bring in a little bit of sarcasm, a little bit of black humor. I think as writers, it is important that we respond to what's happening. And we may not be able to achieve much, but if we are able to get a few people to think and make them aware of what's happening in the country, in the world, then I think we have done something. So I suppose that poem was one such attempt.
Also, you just spoke about the sense of helplessness. That has also come into your poems. I mean, very obviously, you speak about the angst of not having done enough. That was one of the lines in your poems.
Yes.
Can you speak particularly about that poem?
Yes, what I'll probably do is maybe read that poem.
Yes, please do.
Let me stand, if that's okay. I can write about bloodshed and not know how it feels. I can bring to life dead bodies and not see what they cannot see. I can weep for them and not wipe their tears. I can scream and shout and not hear their cries. I can burn myself down and not melt in that heat. I can kick, fight, declare, and not bring myself to care. I can write a poem and still not do enough.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Basically, the idea of things left unfulfilled, the kind of angst that you feel, helplessness as a poet, I think. You speaking in that poem about spilling blood, there's also this underlying line of violence that comes through. The violence against women, the trauma of violence, both perpetrated and suffered. And those expressed actually in everyday images. Your poem, Conditioner, there are so many layers to Conditioner. Perhaps you should read that poem and then talk about it.
Sure. Conditioner. She should have used a conditioner. Would have made it smoother when dragged by her hair. Any brand would have done. May have distracted her when he was holding her down. Conditioners can condition hair, skin, legs, breasts, vagina, but mostly screams which don't leave a stunned mouth held shut by a knife. If only she had used a conditioner, would have been a smoother ride when he showed her who's the boss. When she told the cop and he listened with empathy, feeling her up. That night she used soap with glycerin and antiseptics, hoped it would clean her up. But nothing came close to a conditioner. Next time I will condition myself before leaving my house, she thought, as she brushed her knotted hair down. She should have used a conditioner. So in this poem, the conditioner, a very ordinary cosmetic product, becomes a metaphor of what conditions are thinking. Women who are victims of violence, how they are conditioned to not talk about it, how they are conditioned to not go to the police, to not take recourse to the law because, it becomes a matter of shame. I also wanted to talk about rape in a very blunt, ironic way. Because one thing I completely believe in is that you cannot write about powerful experiences, painful experiences, with too much emotion, with too much melodrama. You have to control it. So this was my attempt at that. And it was very painful writing it too, because it's also about a woman who does decide to talk to the cops, but the cops actually feel her up in that process. So that was the whole irony of the whole experience. Yeah.
And the conditioning that we go through also, I suppose, the conditioning about, the gender stereotypes that we subscribe to. One thing that we were talking about just now, which I think will be interesting to the audience, was how you feel when the audience dissects your poetry. You have your views, your thinking when you put in the images in your poetry, and then the audience has a different interpretation. How does that feel?
No, I sincerely believe that once a poem is written and is published, it no longer belongs to the poet. It then belongs to the reader. So the reader is free to interpret it any way they want, and it is theirs. So they are free to do whatever they want with it. I don't think I have the right to object to any kind of an interpretation or dissection.
Lovely. Now, another poem that came to mind is University Meeting. Very, very realistic, the stark realism in the encounter between the activists and the indifference of the public. Is there a note of protest in that?
Well, actually, it comes from a very real incident that happened. I was in England. I was on a writing fellowship, and I was walking past this. I was in a university town. I was in Canterbury. And there was this very young student who was leading a protest meeting. And there she was, you know, yelling at the top of her voice, very passionate about the cause she was supporting. And I walked past, I stood in front of her for some time, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to respond to what she was asking of me as a member of the audience. But then I just hurried away. I was like, no, I have that to do, I have this to do. And then it reminded me of our indifference to most important causes in life. And usually we make note of things. We may read a very moving article in the newspaper, but what do we do about it? You know, so it reminded me of that indifference, and I wanted to write about it. I wanted to write poking fun at myself. So that is what I did.
It might interest you to know that when I read it, I saw it as a jibe at both sides. You know, I saw it as a jibe at this strident activist who's actually not making much of a difference because of the indifference of our public. So that might interest you because that is how the reader responded to it. Now, many of your poems, particularly your earlier poems, are connected to places. The Mylapore poem, particularly, which is not there in Bittergout, where you speak about the relationship between the place and your mother. That was a beautiful poem, and those are part of your Chennai poems. There's one poem in this, East Fort. Is that a Trivandrum poem?
Definitely. The place is something that has an identity for me. I think for all of us, there are places which leave a deep impression on our minds, on our souls. Whether it is our hometown, whether it is the place where we were born and raised, the place where we studied, or maybe the place where we met our beloved, right? Every place has a certain resonance in our minds. So a place has always been very important to me. So in my first collection, there are Chennai poems, there are Delhi poems, there is a Chalai series, Chalai in Trivandrum. Even this one has a couple of place poems. So my novel, Sea, is about an imaginary place, Sea. So a place is undeniably very important to me. And East Fort, yes, it's about East Fort. Those of you who are familiar with Trivandrum know the East Fort, so it is about East Fort.
Would you like to read the poem?
Sure.
I think it's page 27.
27. So I also wanted to create a bit of a musical effect because you find, have any of you been to East Fort in Trivandrum? Okay, I see one hand there. But basically it is the old city where, it's within the walls of an old fort. It's a crumbling fort. And you find the walls which are uneven. So I wanted to create that uneven effect. East Fort. Walls wobble along the walkway where the kingdom once lay stitched within woolly winters the other side of west, where the fort still guards legends that weather stone, where tales hang like webs, wither like royal treasures and graces. Walls fall like uneven W's, wail like God, wistful, widowed, and waiting for the fort to rise again. When?
Thank you. Many of your poems are brilliant imagery, actually. But in the domestic poems, cleaning the house, planning dinner, these do you use these as metaphors for women, for rebellion, assertiveness?
I don't know about assertiveness, but rebellion for sure. I think the everyday experiences that all of us encounter, everyday experiences like, I don't know, your routine, right? Getting ready for your work, planning dinner, you're cooking breakfast, you're packing lunch, a meeting with a colleague. All these experiences have certain elements of things which are unsaid. It could be some anger that's bubbling away. It could be some kind of bitterness. So that's what I was trying to capture in these poems, or the everyday poems. And one such poem is called Planning Dinner. Maybe I'll just read it. I'm sure in this audience there are many who plan dinner, who spend a few minutes, okay, what shall I cook tomorrow? And there's a lot of frustration in that. Oh, now what? What am I going to make tomorrow, right? How do I keep my family happy? Anyway, planning dinner. There's butter in the fridge anyway, enough to last a week for two. Idlis are great, but too cumbersome. Their molds pile, grate in the sink, steel scrubs, screams shrill. Soft mounds turn surly in the end. Idlis are not as easy as you think. Supple, warm, plump. They soak up sambar only if they ferment as long as swear words that linger unsaid, unheard in the tap water, now gushing out loud, loud enough for the neighbors to know it's idlis for sambar. So no idlis tonight. Let's settle for dosa. Let's go round and round, leave a sizzle here, a dribble there. Crisp enough for you?
That's fantastic. I think I'm sure the audience will have questions on this particular poem. This image of protest comes through not only in your everyday poems, but mostly in your poems where you use the body as a metaphor for protest. How do you use these images as a protest against the oppressive structures?
Well, for instance, I think the very part of the body that is violated can become a metaphor of protest. So, for instance, there was an incident in which a co-passenger on an air flight, on an international flight, tried to misbehave with me. What happened? I'm sure many of you have experienced this, the women, who've been through all kinds of public transport. Right? So here was this man who thought I was asleep and I could feel his hand on my thigh. So I decided to write where the thigh would become, a metaphor of protest. Let me see if I can find it. It's a very short poem, so I can read it.
I remember being struck by the poem because you speak of being up in the air, and I said this is about an aircraft, because usually what happens is these are things that happen, in a public bus. You do not expect this kind of aggression happening on a flight.
Oh no, it can happen. Yeah. Sharp objects not allowed on board. I should have sat there and chopped off the hand that went up my thigh. The next time I won't freeze. I won't hesitate, not in the least. There'll be no sharp objects on board, but there'll be a body defiant as steel. That'll be mine. That'll be mine.
Awesome. Another thing that you have written about in one of your articles is how you can use poetry as a cure. Poetry as a cure for depression is what you had written, but in other ways, to think of what Auden had written about, he says in one of his poems, poetry does nothing. But you obviously have a different take on it. What do you think a poet can do? Should a poet care? Perhaps you could just elaborate on this idea of poetry being of need, the need of the hour.
It's like what I was saying earlier. As writers, we have the responsibility to respond, to react, to not go to sleep, to not close your eyes at what's happening in the world. And sometimes to come to terms with your own experiences, which may be unpleasant, which may be awful, which may be terrible, which can actually, which can completely freeze you in your track, and you don't know what to do with it. Writing can help you overcome that feeling. And it's not a self-indulgence. It is not like writing a diary, because as humans, we go through similar experiences. It could be an abusive relationship. It could be abuse on the street where there is a crime being perpetrated. It could be psychological abuse. It could be all sorts of injustices. If you are able to write something which a reader who has been through a similar experience can relate to, I think that in that sense, poetry can be healing. And in also adding to that, I'm just going to quickly read another poem, a very short poem, where I wanted to write about something to let myself know that I'm not going to sit quietly when any kind of injustice is committed. What you don't know. You think you can stun me to sleep, shun my words and hold me down. What you don't know is I am an axe.
When you initially wrote that, I was wondering, when you initially wrote that, did you write further? I'm an axe, and then
yeah, actually there was another line at the end of it. What you don't know is I am an axe, I cut you down. That was the last line initially. But then I removed that because it's unnecessary.
Yes.
If I am an axe, I will cut you down.
I thought that was brilliant. I mean, that's something that young poets perhaps could pick up on. To know where to stop, to know what to cut out. In that tone, I mean, to end on that, I think we are almost out of time. But you've always spoken about, mentorship. You've spoken about your mentors. How important is mentorship to an upcoming poet, somebody who's writing and doesn't really know what to do? Mentorship, and on top of which, how important is it for youngsters who have started writing to read contemporary poets, to edit, because you are an editor as well, to edit poetry or to comment on poetry?
Well, I will answer the second part of the question. It's absolutely important to read. If you want to get better at something, if you want to get better at writing, you have to read. That's the only way. There are no shortcuts. And there's a lot of wonderful contemporary Indian poetry. I think we should also, while we read the classics, while we read the Western poets, I mean, I myself grew up reading Sylvia Plath and T.S. Eliot, and they're all, gurus in my mind. But it's also important to be aware of what's happening in India, of the trends in India. One thing I find with the present generation is many of them are not aware of the Indian poets. I think it's important to read Indian poetry as well, and we have a lot of brilliant poetry. Absolutely important to have mentors. It's important to write, to seek feedback from the right mentors and be open to that feedback. It's very heartbreaking to hear any kind of criticism, And you know, when someone is told you need to remove that line, or that's a terrible word, you have to, you know, you have to remove it. It first feels terrible, but you have to be willing to go through that process. You have to be willing to let go of words which are important to you. At the end of the day, it's a craft, right? Writing poetry, it's like any other occupation. You have to get better at it by editing, by revisiting, through feedback. I was very lucky to first get the mentorship of Dr. Ayappa Panikar, who was extremely encouraging, very indulgent of me. And he used to always tell me, write as much as you can, write about anything and everything. Don't be in a hurry to publish. And I took that advice very seriously. I brought out my first collection very late. I took about 10 years to put that collection together. I was in no hurry. But I think that's important. To me, that was important. It was not about the quantity, it was about the quality. So now when I look back, I'm very happy about those decisions I took. So I was very happy to get mentors like Ranjit Hoskote and Arundhati Subramaniam, Jerry Pinto, who also become very important friends in my life, and they are all at the festival this year here. So yes, absolutely important. I've been very fortunate.
I think your collection is something that they should read, because particularly the images, these are images that you can relate to so easily. And these are our images, you know, things that we recognize in our everyday lives. I think we're almost out of time, but I think we can take a couple of questions at least from the audience.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Generally, I've heard that poetry is more powerful or more efficient when it's recited. So just a question whether you do audio, especially when it's more therapeutic and all, whether you do audio versions of your poetry for the recital part or the audibility part.
I haven't done audio versions so far, but I do believe that reciting or reading poetry is important for the reader to connect. But there are some poems which are meant to be read on the page also, you know, where the form becomes important. For instance, I have a poem in one of my previous books where the entire poem is written in reverse. So that is, it's reverse. It's basically, it's meant to, what do I say, talk about the mirror, you know. So the poem is called Mirror, and all words, everything is reverse. Yes. So I can't possibly read it. It will be lost on the audience. So that needs to be seen on the page. Yeah.
It's in this volume.
Yes, I've included it in this book also, but it first appeared in my novel. Yeah.
Hello. Hello. Good morning. Why it is only for knife and axe and all those things? Why can't you write about sweet things?
Sorry, about?
Poetry is all about knives, axe and all those things. Why can't you read sweet things?
Sweet things. Okay. Well, I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I've become very cynical with age, you know. So maybe all my anger is showing up like that. But I do have a few pleasant poems.
No, I mean, probably you should start with her first collection. You got lovely, very sweet poetry, particularly the Fatima Mata poem.
I mean, the first poem the opening poem in the collection is actually a tribute to my parents, and it's a tribute to their Malayalam. It's because, you know, even though it is the language of my parents, I never wrote in Malayalam. So it's about Malayalam, and there it is. If you see it, you will see that it's all very soft images. If there's time, I can quickly read that. There are a few seconds left, so I'm just going to quickly read maybe a stanza or something. Malayalam for my parents. I don't remember the first word I heard, but I must have listened to the songs you sang even before the two of you met. Each tune young as your Malayalam. Every sound plump and full as the eye. falling from your mouths as you called me mole. Mole. Daughter, girl, female. I was me first in your Malayalam, pink as a newborn, young as your Malayalam. Perhaps that was the first word I heard. I grow old, there's grey I try to hide, but each time you call me mole, I'm as young as your Malayalam, tender as ilanir, soft as panni, haunting as Pulluvan Patter. Call me mole, everyone.
Thank you. Anupama, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anupama Raju, Dr. Pradeep Srinivas.